Man, good morning, One Church family. Doesn't that video just kind of get you go, oh, what's going on? Yeah, it does. Man, if you don't know me, my name is Brett, and I'm the group's and missions pastor here. And I'm just so thankful that you're here today. And if you're joining us online, we just want to say welcome. We're so glad that you are with us, and we hope that you feel right at home. Man, so last week, Pastor Blake brought an awesome message and started this series. He kicked it off with this one word, simplify. This one word, simplify, all about taking away what's unnecessary and putting in what is necessary so that we can rest, we can breathe, so that fear, depression, anxiety can flee, right? And he gave us this awesome quote from Hans Hoffman. And it says this: the ability to simplify means to eliminate the unnecessary so that the necessary can speak. So that the necessary can speak. And he went into, there's really one thing, right? There's one thing that matters. And that's simply sitting at the feet of Jesus. Because he's necessary. And he's the one that speaks into our life, that we can delight in, that we can love. And he told us this story that we've heard before, many of us, about Martha and Mary, and Jesus comes into their home. And Martha, I like to think of her in this moment as my grandmother. We called her grandmama growing up. She's in Alabama. And on Thanksgiving morning, this lady turned into like a version of the Hulk and Flash at the same time. I see her pick stuff up that she couldn't normally pick up. She's running around the house, getting tables set, getting plates put on, and she's just cooking all these things. We would have like 5 or 6 pies, and we could only eat like 2.5 between all of us. But she would always just be running around going, hey, do this, do that, do this. That's what I think about Martha. And Martha's trying to get everything set for Jesus. Everything set for everybody around her. And what's Mary doing? She's sitting at Jesus' feet. And Martha looks at Jesus, looks at Mary, looks at the disciples, and she says to Jesus, the Son of God, help me. Jesus, you'd think he'd probably know what was important in life. She looks at him and says, God, help me. I need your help. You need to do something. Tell my sister, because everybody knows if you've got a sibling, you're better than your siblings. It's just obvious. Tell my sister to help me. And what does Jesus say to her? He says, Martha, Martha. How many of y'all have been there where you're looking at God going, God, I've got this plan. I've got these things. I'm hustling, I'm bustling, and I need you on my side. Right? Jesus says, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things. But few things are needed. Indeed, only how many? One. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. You see, the best thing that we can do is focus on the one thing. Focus on Jesus. Eliminating what's unnecessary so that we can have what's necessary, so that the necessary can speak, and that necessary is Jesus. Quieting the noise so that we can hear that still, small voice going, Brett, Brett, Martha, Martha. Right. And so if you're taking notes today, the title of this talk is just Sabbath. Sabbath. And I'm so excited for an initiative that we're gonna start. It's brand new to the church, and we'll get into it in a little bit more detail towards the end of this talk. But it's gonna be about Sabbath meals, where families come together with their kids, bring the whole crew, and meals will be made and served to you in the homes of other people in our church, so that we can build community, so that we can learn more about the Lord, and so that really we can just rest, turn off the technology, put the phones down, and just enjoy God's creation with people and good food. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But the Hebrew word for Sabbath is this, it's Shabbat. And Shabbat simply means this, it means to stop. Shabbat means stop. Put everything on pause, take a break, and stop what you're doing. Now, before we dive into this, I've got a question for you. Have you ever woken up and thought, man, there's so many things that I want in the world. I want a new car. I want a new house. I want kids. I want a spouse. I want maybe a dog. I just want all these different things. I just want them for myself so that I can have them, and all these desires in us, right? We have all of these desires that keep on building up and stacking on another and another and another. For many of you, you're like, man, I just want another Georgia Bulldogs national championship. Y'all said amen. Roll Tide. You've had too many. We need to get rid of that. But my question for you is this: when will it be enough? When are our desires enough? Because what I found in my own life is that when I get a little bit more of something, it's never enough. When I get a little bit newer of something, it's never enough. It's like my desires are almost infinite. Ecclesiastes would say it this way: the eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. You can't see enough, you can't hear enough. There's always more to be had. That's the NIV translation. There's another translation that I really love from a band called the Rolling Stones. And it starts like this, but I'm gonna need your help. I can't get no. Sing it for me. I can't get no. I mean, that was okay. That was decent. But it's true, right? We can never be satisfied. He goes on in that song to talk about the checks he has to write, the things he has to do, the meetings he has. And he's the lead singer of the Rolling Stones, and he's going, it's never enough. When will I be satisfied? You see, the truth is, if we're looking for things on this earth to fill our desires, we'll never be satisfied. We can never have enough. And that's what this whole talk is about today, is just stopping. You see, if we're honest, I think a lot of us would say we've got a lot of desires, and it's hard to fill them. C.S. Lewis, my favorite author, says it this way. He says, if I find myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And for me, I've spent a lot of my life going, man, I've got all these desires, all these things I want. And then when I get them, I feel like I want more. I feel like I want something else. And until I read that quote, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I had a problem. But really, I'm just made for somewhere else. I'm temporary here. Desires are infinite. I'm a temporary body, but my soul goes on forever. My spirit goes on forever. We were made for something more than this. And Sabbath is a reminder of what we were truly made for, and that's just to stop. That's just to rest. That's just to spend a moment, 24 hours with God, with his creation, to delight in him, to look at the breeze, to look at the trees, to look at nature, to spend time with those you love, and just go. You see, Jesus talks about the Sabbath. It's actually mentioned 60 times in the New Testament. Around 60 times, the Sabbath is mentioned in the New Testament. And one of my favorite times it's mentioned, Jesus has the Pharisees talking a lot of trash about him, talking a lot of noise. They're saying, man, he's doing this, and he's doing this, and he's doing this, and they're saying he's so wrong for the way he spends his time on the Sabbath. And Jesus looks at them and he says these words in Mark 2:27. He says, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. You see, he's saying, look, this Sabbath that we have is a gift from God. So let's use it as a gift. Let's take advantage of this moment so that we can enjoy the Sabbath. You see, God made the Sabbath for you. God built this stop in the very fabric of creation. He created the world with this mind, this thought of Sabbath in nature. And we see in Genesis 1:26, it says this, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And this is the part I want us to look at. And there was evening and there was morning. What day? The sixth day. So God creates man on the sixth day. What happens on the seventh? The very first day that man is on earth, it's spent in rest. Genesis 2 says it like this, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array by the seventh day. God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. You see, the first full day man was on earth was the Sabbath. That's crazy to me. It wasn't, hey, you've got to pay your dues. You've got to do all of these things first to get there. You got to take care of nature. You got to name the animals. You got to garden. You got to pick fruit from the trees. No. It was, hey, rest with me. Genesis talks about God literally walking with man in the Garden of Eden, resting, communion with him. See, God created Sabbath for you. And what's interesting is it's a 10 commandment, right? There's 10, I call them the big 10, right? These are the things where God kind of maps out for the Israelites. Hey, this is probably a good model for you to live by. He says things like, hey, let's not steal. Let's not envy. Let's not murder. Let's not commit adultery. Let's not do these things because, it's probably not the greatest way to live your life. And then he says this, in Exodus 28-11, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your female or male servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. You see, what's interesting to me is we like to think that we follow the 10 commandments, right? We like to think that we follow these. And there's really 3 big reasons that I think that the Sabbath day made the big 10. The first one is this, that God blessed the Sabbath day. God blessed it. There's only 3 things in Genesis that God blesses. The first one is animals and nature. The second is humanity. He blesses them by saying, hey, be fruitful and multiply, produce life throughout the earth. And then he blesses the Sabbath. He blesses the Sabbath, and I believe the reason he blesses the Sabbath is just because like animals and humanity produce life, the Sabbath can produce life in you. You see, the Sabbath supplies life to your soul. The Sabbath supplies life to your body. It's a moment to pause, to stop, to rest and say, God, fill me up. God, give me life so that I can give life to others. You see, the Sabbath fills this world with life. You see, when we truly abide in the Sabbath, when we truly abide in Christ, rest in him, that's when I believe that we can truly have life and life to the full. The second is, it's on the list. I went through a few of the 10 commandments already. You know what's interesting? We never look at the 10 commandments and go, Jesus gave me grace. He forgave me. So today, I'm just gonna steal. I'm just gonna steal today, it's gonna be fine. I'm just gonna get dirty with a few lies. I'm gonna covet what they have. We don't say, murder sounds good. It's not something we do. But for many of us, we've taken the Sabbath and said, I'm gonna check that one off the list. I'm gonna cross it off. It's not that necessary for me. See, we don't do that with anything else of the 10 commandments, but many of us do that with the Sabbath. And my name's Brett, and I'm guilty. You see, God created this for a reason. God created this for a reason. And he actually gives us that reason in his word. This is the only commandment of the 10 that gives us an explanation. And you know, as a kid, whenever my dad would give me a rule, he'd say, hey, Brett, don't do this. Or hey, sons, hey, this probably isn't a good idea. Let's stay away from that. Many times I would ask him what? Why, Dad? And what was his answer to me? Because I said so. Just do it. And if I push back on that, little flick to the head. But you know, the Sabbath, God, instead of saying, hey, I just said so on this one, he gives us a reason. Exodus 20:11 says it this way. For in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh. So he gives us the model. He doesn't go, hey, do as I say, not as I do. I'm gonna do it too, but I'm God and I'll still do it. Then he goes on to say, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. You see, he gives us a model for the Sabbath. The explanation of the Sabbath can really be summed up in this one word, rhythm. He says, you've got 6 days to work, to produce, to provide, but one day is mine. One day, just give me some rhythm, just stop and rest. And you see, when we neglect this rhythm that God created for us, we are neglecting the very fabric of God's nature. We are saying, no, God, the way you've made me isn't good enough. I'm gonna keep working, I'm gonna keep striving, I'm gonna keep doing because I got these desires. You see, for me, when I think of rhythm, I think of one thing. I think of this. It's a nice 3-wood. I think of golf. I think of the swing and the tempo that you have to have. And I'll tell you a story. So a few days ago, I got a chance to play with Pastor Blake. And an 80-year-old man named Jim. Guys called him Jimmy. And so he was a golf pro formerly. And we're playing like 3 or 4 holes in. And like, I can kind of see he wants to coach me up. He wants to give me some tips on my game because I'll be honest, I'm terrible. Not that good at golf. And so Jim is looking at me and I'm like, finally, Jimmy, just tell me what I'm doing with this thing because I don't know. And Jim looks at me, takes my club, stares at it for a long time. I'm like, what's Jim doing? And he pats me on the back and he says, you know, maybe you should try basketball. True story. And so I punched an 80-year-old man in the face. Not really, but I did think about pushing him down a hill. And so Jim finally stops and he says, Brett, here's what you need to do. Golf game is about rhythm. You're taking this club and swinging it as hard as you can. And it's not doing what you want it to do. It's a tempo of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's it. That's all this game is. So finally I said, all right, Jim, I'm gonna try it. And guess what happened? I'm on a tee box and I drill it, pipe it down the center of the fairway. And Jim just pats me on the back and keeps walking. Like, man, this 80-year-old man. And about 3 or 4 holes in, I'm still doing really well. Just laying it up on the green. I'm feeling great. And then I decided, you know, that's cool. I'm feeling good. So I'm gonna swing a little bit harder now. And guess what happened? 4 holes of just disgust. But for those 4 holes that I stayed in rhythm, I was so happy. I was full of life and joy. And I didn't feel like I was gonna have a stroke while I was counting my strokes. That's not what was happening. I was so happy. And you see, life for us is all about rhythm. But many times we wanna go in our own strength. Many times we want to provide for ourselves. Many times we want to be the ones that take over and just work and hustle and desire and have more and produce. When God's telling us, hey, I've created a rhythm for you. It's 6 days. It's 6 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then stop. 6 steps and then breathe. You don't have to produce. You don't have to work. You don't have to worry. Trust that I'm God. Trust that I'm your provider. Trust that I'm the one that's really in control. You see, I think for many of us, we've got this great illusion that we're actually the ones in control. We've got the steering wheel and we're going and we're driving and we're moving. And I think God really wants to tell us something. Hey, guess what? I'm God. You're not. I'm in control. And when we take a Sabbath day to breathe, to rest, it puts our desires back in order. It fills us up with life. It gives us what we need to produce life for all of those around us. You see, the first of 4 steps that we're going to talk about, that we're going to walk through today in practicing the Sabbath is stop. See, the Sabbath is a day that we stop. That's what it means. It's its definition, where we stop the hustle, we stop the bustle, we stop trying to do all of the things, and we just rest in God. We pull the brake, we stop the wheels, and we just pause. See, we say, God, you know what? I've actually believed Philippians 4:19, where it says, and my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and glory. It's not on us anymore, and stopping reminds us of that. But you know, for me, many times, I'll leave work, and it's time for me to rest. I'll leave what I'm doing, but I'm still checking emails. I'm still on my phone. I'm still answering people going, this is what I need. This is what I'm going to do. I'll help you with this. When I really believe God's telling us, hey, on the Sabbath, shut it down. How many of y'all have been talking to your wives, and she's talking to you, and all you're thinking about in your mind, you're not at work anymore, but all you're thinking about is, I got to answer this email. Man, he's really going to need this. I'm going to present this presentation. But you know, what does that tell your wife? What does that say to her? It tells her, hey, my prideful need to produce trumps my moments with you. And I don't want that. You see, it's kind of like a leaking tire when you ride a bike. And when the tire's leaking, what's happening? You're striving for more and more. You're working harder, you're sweating, you're mad, you're angry. And eventually, that tire's all the way flat, and you have to stop and change it. The Sabbath is like a weekly check of the tires. Hey, is one leaking? Let's fill back up. Hey, they're all good? Great. We get to rest. We get to roll. It's going to be a great time. You see, Sabbath helps us realize and say, God, you're the one that provides me with my power, my wisdom, my creativity. And we rest in him. And it's interesting because the last time society tried to uptick productivity by adding days to the work week was during the French Revolution. They added the work week to 10 days, 10 whole days. You want to ask them how it worked out? Suicide rates increased, productivity decreased, and their economy crashed. The moment that they tried to produce even more, everything plummeted. It's crazy. But the truth is, God has a rhythm for our lives. You see, when we stop from the physical, we actually stop in the mental and spiritual as well. It allows space for us to search our souls. Psalm 139 says it this way, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Stopping allows for soul searching. Gets us back in the rhythm. The next one is rest. Did you know that there's science behind rest? They did a study of 43,000 people. Now, I don't know how they all said yes to this study, but they studied their sleep, and they found that the people who didn't sleep enough during the week, but did sleep in on the weekends, actually caught up in their mortality rate because of taking time on the weekend to sleep. In other words, sleeping in and resting over a weekend actually helps you catch up on the sleep that you lost. And all the teenagers in the room said, amen. Right? You see, when we are in a place of rest, we slow down enough to see the supernatural. And I really believe that Jesus kind of models this for our lives. We slow down enough to see the supernatural. We get off of social media. We get off of all the distractions, and we just breathe. You know, the Hebrews had a word for the meaning that we have of rest, and it was this word nuach. And it means to dwell or settle. To dwell or settle, this nuach. It's times where you settle in next to the campfire or around the dining room table with your friends, with your family. For me, my wife, my daughter, and people we're close to. Or you're sitting in a coffee shop and just ask somebody, how's life? It's a time to nuach, to settle in where you are, not think about anything else, and just rest where you are. Last week, Pastor Blake reminded us that Jesus extends this offer of rest, this offer of nuach, in Matthew 11:28, where he says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And I'd be willing to bet that that's probably the most used Bible verse in churches around the world about rest. But you know what's interesting about this Bible verse is the very next story that we see is Jesus on, guess, what day? The Sabbath. And what's he doing? His rest looks a little bit different. He's walking with his disciples in the grain fields, picking grain, eating the grain that they pick, talking with his disciples, joking, laughing, talking about the Lord, probably making fun of one of the guys that did something funny. Just enjoying a time to settle in and dwell with his buddies. And the Pharisees look over, they talk trash about this moment, but Jesus models what rest looks like. You see, we need his rest that he's talking about in Matthew, but we find it best in Sabbath. We need his rest, but we find it best in Sabbath. And when I was talking about stopping and seeing the supernatural, you see, the story continues where Jesus performs all these lists of miracles on the Sabbath day. And I truly believe that our rest is correlated with the supernatural. I truly believe that. And the next one is this, delight. Timothy Keller says it this way about delight. He says, because the world is full of ugly things, we need Sabbath to feed our soul with beauty. You see, it's great to stop. It's great to rest. But Sabbath also involves delighting in the Lord and in his creation. See, if all we're doing on the Sabbath is sleeping in, resting a little bit more, we're missing the whole point of delighting in who God is and who he made us to be and in the rhythm and the pace that he created. You see, Sabbath involves a meal. It involves sitting together with one another. It involves slowing down, talking about life, enjoying the presence of those around you, delighting in God's creation. John 13:23 talks about what a Sabbath looked like for Jesus. And he says one of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. For many people back then, they would sit and eat meals on the floor. A little bit more vulnerable. There's not a table blocking you. For us, we can't hide a phone under the table while we're texting at dinner. But for them, it was this moment to just recline, relax, and delight in those around them. You see, when we stop on Sabbath, it allows us to breathe deep, look around, observe what God has given us, the people that God has put in our lives, the moments that God has for us, for our family, for our friends. There's a time in my life years ago where I worked with a pastor on staff at a church in Alabama. He's also a counselor. And I'd have a lot of counseling with him because I really love to just grind and work and go. And he stopped me one day and he said, Brett, you know what? The Lord told me that I need to tell you this. You are a human being, not a human doing. I'd found so much of my worth in creating, in doing, in pursuing the next big thing so that people would say, man, Brett's so great. When he said, no. Delight in me. Delight in who I am. Delight in who I created you to be. Because you know what's cool about God? My dad told me this my whole life, and it's still, sometimes I like to fight against it. But God can do in a moment what it would take us to do in a lifetime. God can do in a moment what it takes us to do in a lifetime. And I've got so many stories of God moving in my life when I just slow down and say, God, I don't know what to do. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where I'm headed. And he goes, I got you. Amen. As Pastor Blake would say, I got you, boo-boo. John 15:4-5 is my I got you, boo-boo verse. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself. We can't bear fruit alone. We can't bear fruit apart from God. We can't bear fruit working all the time without stopping unless it abides in the vine. Neither you, unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. You see, the Sabbath is a time where we are reminded to connect back to the vine. We are invited to connect back to the vine. And you know what's awesome about the vine of Jesus? That vine is divine. He is divine, and he's divinely created us to connect to him. The last one is this, it's worship. You know, for a lot of us, me included, many times I can replace the Sabbath for a Sunday morning service. I can replace that moment for what God intended to be a full day of rest and enjoying him. You see, we're told to make the Sabbath holy, that this thing is holy. And holy simply means this, to sanctify, to set it apart, to dedicate it to God for his special purposes. God's told us, hey, honor this day, set it apart for me. And when we can do that, we can truly worship him. See, Sabbath isn't a day just to sleep in, to stop, to relax, and do whatever you delight in. It's a day to worship, to reorient your entire life, to center it back on Christ. You see, Christ has called us to worship him, especially on the Sabbath, to get back connected to him. And worship is simply just reorienting your life to focus on the goodness of God. What's so cool about worship is you can do it in so many ways. You can do it here, worshiping together. You can pray alone. You can pray with your family. You can go play a sport and worship the Lord. You can stop and play an instrument. For some of you, maybe it's gardening. And you go, man, I'm so thankful for this ground and this earth that God's created to produce. And so you use those moments to just garden. Maybe for you, it's golf. But whatever it is, it stops you in your tracks and goes, God, you're worthy. For me, a lot of times it's driving down the road after work, looking at a sunset. It's worship. And when we stop for 24 hours, reorient ourselves on God, we're able to worship him even better. It's those four things. Make it set apart, make it holy, abide in him. It's four practices of stopping, of resting, of delighting, of worship. Stopping. Are you stopping from your regular work? Are you stopping from the hustle, the bustle, the grind to produce all the desires to gain and build up? Just putting a pause. You know, maybe you're a mechanic and you go, hey, I love to garden. Worship God in your garden. Maybe you work in sales or marketing or something else and you love to build, to create. Worship the Lord while you create on the Sabbath and build. rest? You taking time to breathe deep? Does your day of stopping make you feel restful, or are you hustling to the next thing? Does it refill your soul? Delight? Does this bring you deep joy in who God created you to be? Worship? Does this connect you more deeply to God? That's it. See, for me, I hit a low in October, and I know some of y'all have heard part of that story, but there's a whole nother part. For a couple years, I was working really, really hard, coaching. I'd get up at 3:45 in the morning, 3 days a week. The other day, I'd get up at 4:45, and I'd work out. I'd go train my baseball players from 6 to 7. From 7 to 2, I'd teach, scout teams. I'd figure out what I'm doing when I wasn't teaching for the baseball field. From 2 to 6, we'd run practices. My drive was about an hour home. I get home at 7. I've got a wife and a newborn. And there were days where I didn't see my own child. I wasn't happy. My Saturdays and Sundays were full of coaching players in tournaments around Florida. I was angry. I was easily irritable. Fruit of the Spirit was not around very much. And my wife stopped me and she said, Brett, I've got all this weight on me. I've got all these burdens. And a lot of it was because of me. And I took a moment to say, never again will I do this. Never again will I try to gain all these desires for myself out of line of who God created me to be. Never again will I work to produce and build this name for myself, to build up my flesh. We were at dinner with a really close friend. His name's Brandon. And somebody asked Brandon as a joke that Brandon loves to joke, but can flip the switch and just pierce your soul too. They said, hey, what's your least favorite thing about Brett? Just joking around. I've known him for my whole life. And he said, I don't like that I don't hear Brett laugh anymore. And it struck me, hurt. He just smiled at me and patted me on the back. I didn't know how to respond. I had to hold it together because I was in front of a lot of people. I'm a man, I don't cry in front of people. And we left. Around that same time, Becca and I, our best two friends in Florida, Tiffany and Maddie started what they called a Sabbath meal. And on Friday nights, they would eat dinner together, lights were low, candles. Their daughter would be there too. And they had a rule, no TVs, no technology, nothing. And they invited us over to eat with them. Wasn't a good spot. I think they knew. And they just read Psalms, read scripture. We talked about the good things in life. We laughed, we cried, we hugged, we played games. We'd go have a bonfire. And I realized what I was missing. I was missing the pause. I was out of rhythm. I was out of tune. And all I needed was a reminder, a nudge from God saying, hey, I created you to rest. You can produce for all those 6 days, that's awesome, but take time to rest. Take time to abide in me, to delight in me. And fruit started producing, joy came back. Life was just better because I was connected back to the vine. All the sinful pride and arrogance was still there, but God was doing the work and still is in my life. And never again do I want to go back to that place. And that's why I'm so passionate for you all to join in that. Maybe 24 hours for you is too tough to start with, and that's okay. Start where you are. But I'd encourage you to take time, if God's pulling on your heart, to join our church in this initiative of Sabbath meals. There's a slide that'll come up on the screen. You can go online if you don't want to pull your phone out now. You can scan the QR code there, but if God's pulling on your heart saying, hey, I want to lead a meal where I open up space in my home for families to come in, to eat, to put the technology away, to commune with God, to delight in him, man, please sign up to lead. It's a 4-week commitment, of 4 weeks of just trying it, of Sabbath meals. Maybe you go, hey, I don't want to lead, but I want to be a part. Sign up, and we'll put you in a group. Start in a couple weeks. So we got some time, we'll talk about it. But if God's pulling on your soul, saying, hey, come back to me, rest in me, please join us for that. What's so cool too about the Sabbath, one of my favorite things is this, that Sabbath makes us sensitive to our soul. Sabbath makes us sensitive to what's really going on in our heart, in our soul, what's deep down in there. And I really believe that this Sabbath rhythm of 6 to 1 helps us pause and find out what our soul longs for. David writes it this way. He says, as the deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. And what's interesting, if you look at the deer that are there where David was when he was writing this, they don't sweat. They can't get too hot because they can't cool themselves down. And what will happen is, after running around, after living life, after doing their things, they have to take a moment and pause and find water wherever they are. Because if they don't, they overheat and die. Fall over dead because they're too hot. I think for many of us, our souls fall over dead because we're not stopping. And he says, my soul pants for you, God, for this living water. And you know what? I want to be a church. I want to be a man that my soul longs for God, that my soul has to stop, that it's not I've got to do this to be healthy, but it's no. I love doing this. I love pausing. I love resting. I love this because I get to be in communion with God in a different way, in the rhythm that he's created. Let's be a church like that we wake up and go, God, I just long for you. I long for what you want. I long for you to fill me up, to produce life in me, for me to be connected to the vine so that I can produce life. I just want to pray over us today. God, we thank you, Lord, that you're good. God, we thank you that you've put in us this unique desire, God, and you're the only one that can fill it. We can't fill it with anything else. We can't do anything with it that's gonna fill it, but turn to you. God, I thank you that you've created Sabbath for us as a gift. And Lord, I pray that we would turn our eyes to you. God, that we would shift moments to where we'll just pause, where we'll stop, rest, delight, and worship in you. Lord, we love you. We thank you and we praise you in your name. God, amen.